How we doing, history buffs? John here. Whew, that is strong, son. I'm used to coffee, and this Red Bull will slap you in the face when you're not used to it. Just a wow. Just a heads up. This will premiere on Prepper Nation tomorrow morning as well. Same video. The reason being, a lot of people on Prepper Nation still don't know that we have a history channel. They still don't know we have a backup channel. I mention it over there from time to time, but we do have a lot of new faces over there, which I'm thankful for. But I just want them, I want to give them a little bit of what we got going on over here. And if they enjoy it or whatever, I will drop a link for them. So you're under no obligation to watch this video twice, folks. Just a heads up. I'm not running you off. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. If you want to be in the premiere again, hey, there we go. So Confederate Memorial Day brings a lot of emotion to Americans. It brings a lot of different theories and concepts and opinions, and it should. But where do I stand on Confederate Memorial Day? Do I think we should have a Confederate Memorial Day? Truth is, I don't know. I'm going to make a case and an argument for both sides here during this video, and then we're going to go from there. And it's up to you to make your own mind up. I'm not here to change your mind one way or the other. I'm just going to present some facts and then let you think about it, okay? Because it's going to roll around next year. And let me just say this really quickly. Anytime Confederate Memorial Day or the mention of the Civil War even is brought up, it immediately goes to racism, slavery. And that stuff was certainly going on. I'm not discounting it, but let me just say, only an idiot believes that a war is fought for a single reason. Wars are very complex. There are a lot of things that lead into a war. No war, not the Civil War or any other war, is fought over one single thing. And I think people are doing themselves a disjustice online, on social media, etc. They went to the wrong college or whatever. If they graduate and they truly believe the Civil War was fought just over slavery and nothing else. The fact that approximately 95% of the people fighting for the Confederate States of America didn't have slaves should tell you all you need to know about that. The elites and the very wealthy in the South, they did have slaves, and they were very influential in the South. But many people were also defending their homes, and we're going to get into that. So we need to ask ourselves, and this is a funny question because it's been so many years, and historians cannot even agree why the Civil War started outside of slavery. I think most historians will tell you slavery had something to do with it, of course, but there are other reasons. They'll agree that there were other reasons, but they begin to disagree on what those reasons were, who was in the right, who was in the wrong. So we're going to cover that today, okay? December the 20th, 1860. And look, I'm a World War II guy, so I had to write the dates down. I didn't want to get them mixed up here, okay? December the 20th, 1860. South Carolina becomes the first state to secede from the Union, from the United States. In other words, this is the date where they said, we out of here, son. We ain't taking it no more. Now, they had their reasons, and we'll get into that in a minute, but they were the first. By February the 7th of the following year, 1861, 7 states total had left the Union. And February 7th is significant because this is the day when they draft the Confederate States of America. They drafted their own constitution. In fact, they had their own, it was temporary, but they had their own version of a White House in Montgomery, Alabama. So, in my opinion, and this is something, again, historians disagree on, was the Confederate States of America an actual country, or was it just a bunch of traitors and an uprising, etc. And that's something that textbooks will even disagree on. Foreign nations outside of the United States, they disagreed on this. And I'm going to make the argument today that they were, in fact, a country. And here's why. Again, number one, they had their own version of a White House. They had their own constitution. They would go on shortly thereafter to form their own military. They had their own currency. They had everything that you would expect a nation to have, right? So what happens is they secede. They do, they draft their own constitution, and we'll get into the reasons in a minute, and they begin to seize federal buildings that the United States has owned and operated. So let's just use South Carolina as the example here. These folks are in South Carolina. There's a federal building, whatever it may have been used for, a supply depot, post office, whatever. So they give these people, notice, advance notice. They're like, we're becoming our own country. You need to get out. If you are going to be sympathetic with the United States of America, here's your chance. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. After a certain amount of time, they just started seizing everything. The buildings, to the south, to the Confederate States of America, they said, okay, this is South Carolina. That's South Carolina's property. Therefore, that's our building. You understand? And again, they gave these folks fair warning. They gave the United States fair warning. Buchanan, who was president when all of this first started, he didn't really know what to do. He viewed it as an uprising and an illegitimate, I would say, government. He didn't really view them as an actual country, but he went through the Constitution, himself and his staff. They went through the U.S. Constitution, and he really didn't see any options that he could use to force the Confederate States of America to stay. And they dug pretty deep on the U.S. Constitution. And what this tells me right away is that these states that seceded did so legally, in my opinion. Okay, so they were well within their rights to leave legally. So in the framework of the Constitution, Buchanan doesn't see any options. He just kind of turns a blind eye to it, and he's focused on the West, expanding out west. So the Confederate States of America, they're allowed to do, whatever they want to in the South, basically. At one point, after Lincoln becomes president of the United States, the Confederates, they send a delegation to Washington, D.C., Washington. And they say, look, we're our own deal now. We don't recognize your laws, but we don't want war or anything, because war was starting to brew. They said, we don't want conflict. We don't want it to be, brother against brother, etc. They offered a peace treaty to the United States of America. And they said, just, leave us alone. Let us do our own thing. We will trade back and forth. The South, I should say the Confederacy, their stance was pretty simple. They viewed themselves as a smaller version of the Bluecoats from 1776. All right. They felt like the tyranny in Washington, D.C. had become really bad, and the corruption. They felt like they were not being equally represented anymore in Congress, and they really didn't have that much of a say-so over the government. Now, slavery was a huge factor in this, right? They were arguing basically slave states versus free states as they entered the United States, mainly out west. And this, of course, did play into it. So that when the textbooks tell you it was about slavery, it absolutely was. But there were other things involved, okay? So it was about slavery, but the people in the South realized, okay, slavery is probably going to be done and over with in, a couple of decades anyway. They knew it was dying out, right? The cotton gin gets invented and that prolongs it for a while, but they know the end is coming. They are looking a little further down the road, all right? Maybe not the, these huge plantation owners, but I'm saying the representatives in Congress, they know the end is near when it comes to slavery, but 20 years down the road, as these new states enter, we're not going to have a say-so in the government anymore. We're not going to be equally represented. And this was one of the huge problems when it comes to the Revolutionary War. Everybody thinks stamp tax. Stamp tax caused the war. Well, that was part of it. But they were also tired of not being represented because they were, in theory, they were English citizens still because it was a colony, but they had no say-so in England, politics whatsoever. So, same deal here. The South believed, look, if we don't have any say-so in our future, one way or the other, whether you agree with what the South was trying to do or not, if they don't have any say-so, why are we hanging around? And so that is why they chose to leave. I mean, there was a list of complaints, right? So they bring a treaty to Lincoln and to the White House, and Lincoln refuses it. He declined it, and he said, I don't recognize the Confederate States of America as an actual country. And I'm going to argue this morning, this is why the Civil War actually started. I think that there had been plenty of delegations, there had been plenty of talks. Both sides had tried to talk back and forth. A lot of people don't know, but Lincoln absolutely refused a treaty with the Confederate States of America. And his Secretary of State, behind his back, went to the Confederate States of America and was like, look, I recognize that you guys are your own country, but we need to work on some sort of a different treaty because this just don't work for the U.S. And they were trying to, as we say, lowball the Confederate States of America, and they just weren't gonna do it. So the Confederate States of America, again, they begin seizing all sorts of stuff at this point. They realize if Lincoln doesn't think that we're a country, then we have no representation, plus they're not taking us seriously down here. It was almost like Chaz. Lincoln viewed the Confederate States of America as a widespread Chaz. No legitimacy whatsoever. And the South did not view itself in that way. So they began seizing everything. They're like, well, we'll show Lincoln what's up. So they start taking military forts. And when you get to Fort Sumter, which is really where the Civil War begins, right? The first shots are fired anyway. This fort was Lincoln's bluff. In my opinion, Lincoln did not think that the Confederate States of America, number one, were a country. And number two, he didn't think that they would have the balls to go against the United States when push came to shove, okay? So they signed a silly piece of paper that said we secede from the Union. And so they drafted their own constitution and they have their own version of the White House. That's child's play. They're not going to fire on the United States of America. So Lincoln doubles down on Fort Sumter. He puts rations there. He puts armaments there. He puts soldiers there, and they refuse to leave. And the Confederates, at this point, they're like, you need to leave. So try and take that situation, all right, and apply it to 2021. So let's, for example, let's say you roll up on where the United States of America, we happen to roll up on, out in the middle of nowhere, a military fort. And this military fort has the Spanish in it. Okay, now this is theoretical, of course. And we're like, man, you're in the United States of America. You need to get out. And these folks refuse to leave. What other options do you have on the table at this point? Right? So the South knew, the Confederates knew, in order to get these folks out, we're going to have to fire shots. We don't want to fire shots. We've offered these folks a peace treaty. We just want to be left alone, but they will not leave. We can't have another country's military boom right here in this fort because it was on a major waterway. Lincoln knew this. And again, Lincoln didn't think they would do anything about it. So he's like, nah, we'll just pack it out and see what happens. Well, what happens was the Confederates begin shelling it. And now Lincoln is really, in my opinion, responsible for the Civil War. I mean, he really is. And let me just make an argument for this real quick, okay? The guy had very little, if any, respect for the Confederate States of America. And, you know, some of you out there may feel the same way, and that's okay. But here he is, you know, he's just being arrogant about it. Let's throw troops into the fort and see what they do. Well, they started shooting at the troops. And so now Lincoln has a war on his hand. Now he's got to save face in front of the United States of America and say, oh, well, we have no choice now. We must go to war with these Confederates, these traitors. And so he gets that sympathy at home, you know, for his war. I always throw the war into his lap because I think he was hugely responsible for the Civil War, okay? And so now he's got this war in his lap, and he still refuses to realize that the Confederate States of America are the real deal, that they are their own country. He says, well, you know, we'll just raise an army right quick, and we'll send them down, and we'll just, you know, make short work of the Confederates here. And he tries that at Bull Run, and he finds out as his, you know, he sends in inexperienced troops, inexperienced leadership for the most part. They get the brakes beat off of them, and they hightail it back home. And he realizes, I think after Bull Run, oh my God, this is a serious problem. And then, of course, the Civil War ensues. So the question is, and we asked this last time we talked about the Civil War, okay, but it's a very relevant question. I've said that this is on Lincoln, and I do believe it's on Lincoln. The fundamental question that needs to be asked here, the fundamental question that still hasn't been answered in 2021, was the Confederate States of America its own country, or were they just a bunch of traitors trying to, like a coup attempt? For me, they were their own country. Again, they had their White House, or their version of it. They had a president, you know, in Jefferson Davis. They had their own currency. They had everything that the United States had. They didn't have as much of it, of course, especially when it comes to the factories and things. But they had their own working economy, etc. And so when you get down to it, was this an actual country? Because when you ask people this online, you know, and they're throwing out the blanket statement, oh, it was about racism, it was about slavery. And you propose this question to somebody, you pose it to them, look, were they an actual country or not? Because either way you slice it, Lincoln has blood all over his hands. If this was an actual country, the Confederate States of America, then Lincoln was the aggressor. Lincoln was the aggressor by packing out a fort on property that no longer belonged to the United States. And he knew this. It wasn't like he accidentally tripped and fell into that situation. He packed it out on purpose. Okay, so that's one scenario, and that started the war. And now Lincoln becomes the only U.S. president in history to, you know, fight an illegal war with the South, or whatever you want to call it. On the flip side of the coin, if your position is that the Confederate States of America were not an actual nation, you know, maybe they were just some states, some rebel states with some grievances. Some people believe that, even historians. And I see that viewpoint. But even so, Lincoln has blood on his hands, because now you've just invaded your own country. You know what I'm saying? You have caused a war with your own countrymen. So either you invaded illegally into another country, or you launched a war against your own people. Lincoln looks horrible. If you take the time to look at history. Now, I know a lot of people celebrate Lincoln and say, oh, he's the greatest president of all time. He really wasn't. He was probably one of the worst. Because, again, it's not like this situation just popped up and he was handling it as he could. No, he knew what was going down. He knew the consequences of the things that he was doing. When the Confederate States of America showed up and they said, look, we have a treaty. Can we talk about it? Instead of shooing them away like gnats, if Lincoln was a good president, he would have said, you know what? I will sit down with you folks and we will figure out something. A good president would have talked through this stuff, would have found some middle ground. You got to concede a little bit in negotiations, and we'll find something that works. Lincoln wasn't willing to do that. He took a hardline stance. Number one, that's bad. Number two, he sends in, again, inexperienced troops into the South because he woefully underestimated what the Confederate States of America had going on. Getting back to the original question, should we celebrate the Confederate States of America like the Memorial Day? You have to look at it from the viewpoint, and it's very hard for people to do this many years later, right? Most people, again, they could care less about history. You know, it's some boring subject and they just want to play Grand Theft Auto or whatever. Go to Starbucks. But the fact of the matter is, you have to understand all of the dynamics. Again, it wasn't just slavery that caused this war. So you have to understand all of the dynamics that went into the war. And you have to look at both sides. I try and break this down to my kids on a very elementary level, okay? I say, look, this is like a boyfriend and a girlfriend breaking up, a couple breaking up, okay? Except in this scenario, one of the two people, they never get to speak again. And so, you know, imagine, you ladies out there, imagine having a breakup with a guy that you just thought was treating you wrong. You know what I'm saying? And from that moment forward, you were never allowed to tell your side of the story. And so this man that you split up with or try and split up with, his words become the gospel. Everybody, future generations hear only his side of the story. Nobody ever knows your side of the story. And that's the problem with most people today, especially our younger people. They hear that one side of the story. They hear the Union's or the United States' side of the story, but they don't take the time to dig around and investigate the other side of the story. And the other side of the story is, yes, there were some racists in the South and some slave owners, and that stuff is unforgivable. But there were also a lot of good people that were watching people around them, neighbors and things, having their farms burnt down. They watched people being raped. They were parents that, their kids, basically got pulled into a war. They didn't want their kids there in the first place, and they ended up losing their kids in the war. Soldiers were there for different reasons. They weren't there to defend slavery. By and large, they were there because they needed the money, or they thought there was some kind of glory in the war, or they had seen the Union do horrific things. And it's kind of like, do you just allow them to do it and continue to do it, or do you sign up with the Confederate States of America and do you try and fight back? A lot of soldiers were doing this. So, I mean, it's a great question, right? Do we celebrate the Confederate States of America here in the United States? I say yes, because I think it is part of this nation's history. The thing about history is you don't have to agree with all of it. You don't have to say, oh man, we made the right choice every single time. And these folks that are trying to rewrite history now, these extreme progressives, They're going through, and they really are. They're trying to change history to fit the narrative of 2021. And that's really unfair, because we need to understand why this stuff was taking place in the first place. We need to understand what allowed slavery to happen and why it happened for so long in this country, so we never see it again, right? I'm not sitting here saying, hey, I agree with it. I'm saying it happened, and we need to study it from a history standpoint. We need to understand also the grievances that the Confederate States of America had, because a lot of them actually are starting to fall in line with 2021. We're starting to see government overreach again. We're starting to see some states, their power in Congress, etc., being diminished. We're starting to see a lot of people in states. Let me give you a perfect example, okay? I'll close it out shortly, I promise. So, perfect example. Let's say you are a conservative, but you are stuck in a highly liberal state. Let's say you are stuck in California. California is a great example, right? So you're stuck in California, and no matter how many times you go to the poll and vote, you go every year, every 2 years, every 4 years, and you vote down ballot Republican. Okay, you really want things to change in your state, but they never do. And they never do because to you, it feels like your voice doesn't matter anymore. It feels like you have no control, right, over the way things are being run in California. So what are your options? You can't go and change the way things are being run in California. You've already tried that. You've already tried that through the ballot box. Your other alternative is to leave. To leave California and go do your thing somewhere else. This is what the Confederates did. They felt like their voice didn't matter anymore. And they tried through Congress, and some of the things they tried in Congress weren't great. Okay, I'm not saying these people were perfect. I'm saying they had their own vision for the United States of America. Liberals had their own vision of the United States of America. And conservatives in the South had gotten to the point where they're just like, look, we're not being listened to anymore. We have lost our power in Congress and Senate. It's over for us. We're never going to be heard from again. Nothing's ever going to change. So their alternative was to leave. They tried to do it peacefully, and it didn't quite work out because, I would argue, of Abraham Lincoln. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, rhetorical question. Should we here in the United States, I don't want to say celebrate the Confederate States Memorial Day, but at least acknowledge it. I think we should acknowledge it. I think it's a mistake to forget about the people that fought on either side of this war, because this war helped to shape the United States of America. That's just my opinion. Guys, this is John with Prepper Nation History today, and I hope you have a blessed rest of the day. The email is down below if you want to email me about this, and of course I'll go through and read all of the comments. God bless.